Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's RTPI webinar hosted by the RTPI East Midlands branch on climate action, protecting communities from tidal surges. I'm Jesson, I'm the chair of the RTPI East Midlands branch and I'm delighted to have you in attendance this afternoon. This webinar looks at the role of a major infrastructure project in safeguarding communities from climate change, along with other local delivery projects and regeneration, and how they too have captured the value of effective community engagement. Joining me today on this particular webinar as part of the RTPI's online event series are Adam Robinson from the Environment Agency and Mike Gildersleeves from Boston Borough Council. Together we're going to bring this webinar to you today, and hopefully you'll learn a significant amount about what is going on in Boston Borough, but also the significance of this infrastructure project. Before we begin and I go on to Adam, just a couple of helpful pointers to you attending today should you wish to raise a question. The presentation will largely be contained within the hour and we'll have an opportunity for several questions to be brought out towards the end. If you want to raise a question, you can suggest this by writing into the chat or questions function on the right hand side of your screen on the GoToMeeting portal. We've also got today delighted to have the RTPI President 2020, Sue Manns, present on this call on what was originally part of her presidential visit to Lincolnshire. So hopefully today's webinar will capture the spirit of what we intended to do in person. And that's it now for me. I'm going to pass on to Adam Robinson from the Environment Agency, who's Chief of the Boston Barrier Project, and he'll be able to cover this infrastructure project more widely. Thank you. Adam.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, Chris, for that great introduction. And thank you, everybody, for inviting me to present today on the Boston Barrier. Hopefully you can all see my front slide. As Chris said, I'm Adam Robinson. I work for the Environment Agency and I'm the Boston Barrier Project Director. I've been on the scheme since 2015. So what we've got is a bit of a whistle-stop tour over the next sort of half an hour to run you through what we've been up to, where we are now and where we are moving into the future, and how that provides an enhanced level of protection to Boston and the local community. So the Boston Barrier, for those of you that don't know what we're doing, the scheme background is a great picture there of our incident responders. Unfortunately, in 2013, December the 5th, there was a East Coast tidal surge, which overtopped the number of defences in Boston Town Centre and flooded up to 800 properties and businesses. Obviously, we had incident responders who were on site recovering people and property, and that then really kick-started the Boston Barrier project that we live and breathe today. So Boston Barrier, it's been in concept for a number of years. As I said, in 2013, with that inundation, it became a national priority project. We were very lucky to become part of a guaranteed funding stream through central government, and we were named in the autumn statement as a major infrastructure project key for delivery in the current 6-year programme that we're currently operating under. So that's kind of a bit of the background of where we are and where we've come from. Benefits of Boston. So 2 images here. So the image on the left that you can see, which is the existing tidal flood extent. So within that green area, we currently have a level of protection within Boston Town Centre that can be overtopped. And those areas include a number of local amenities, impacts on Pilgrim Hospital, a grade 1 listed structure called the Stump locally, a number of local schools, primary and secondary schools. We've got an operational port and 14,000 properties, in excess of 14,000 properties and businesses in that area that can be impacted by a East Coast tidal surge. So what we're doing is we're investing in the Boston area, and what we're doing is we're constructing the Boston Tidal Barrier. And the image on the right shows the benefit of our project to the local community. So what we'll end up with is a project that will provide in excess of a 1 in 300 year level of protection. So that's one of the highest levels of protection outside of London. London obviously has a similar level of protection to it, and Boston will be one of those similar areas where we have that added benefit. While we're going through the project, obviously we look at cost benefit analysis on how we fund the project for Boston and the surrounding area, because not only does it protect Boston, but obviously extends out to our East Coast defences down the Haven and links into our coastal defences further down and out onto the East Coast. So we actually stopped counting those benefits when we reached about 1.2 billion pounds worth of benefits through the investment of just over 100 million pounds in Boston. So we have a really healthy cost benefit ratio for delivering our scheme. So what is it that we're actually delivering in Boston? So at the moment, Boston Town Centre benefits from flood defences, which are standard flood defence walls and a number of mobile gates. And what we're actually constructing is a new radial sector gate, rising sector gate that sits in the base of the Haven. And this is a cross section through that new barrier that we've installed, whereby we can deploy it. It's a smaller version of what sits, or a larger version of what sits in Ipswich, and similar concept to what we've got on the Thames barrier down in London. So it's 25-metre wide rising sector gate, and it's about 300 tonnes. We ballast it off with about another 300 tonnes of water, and it's operated off 2 hydraulic rams. Each of those rams weigh 56 tonnes each, and we've got 16,000 litres of hydraulic oil that drives those systems, with a whole raft of redundancies. So we've got primary power from Western Power Networks. We've got a secondary generator, which should we have a mains power supply failure, that will automatically kick in. And we've also got emergency hydraulic power units. And not only that, but we can also operate the barrier off one of those rams, off one of the single rams rather than the pair of rams that operate the gate normally. So a whole raft of redundancy within there to ensure that we provide that level of protection to Boston and the surrounding areas once we need to deploy it in the event of an East Coast surge. So what we have on site is 2 main areas. Everyone looks at the big shiny barrier. So this is the tidal barrier that we installed at the back end of last year. That's what everyone seems to concentrate on. But not only that, is we have a second set of vertical sector gates that are going to sit in the port wet dock entrance that you can see here on the right hand side of the slide. They're currently looking to be commenced construction beginning of next year. But they're a massive piece of infrastructure in their own right as well. And not only that, but we've also had 50,000 cubic metre capital dredge within the navigational haven. We've got additional scour protection that we've put in. We've got a new barrier control room, which we've taken out a long lease on the port estate. So that will see us out for the 100-year design life of the barrier. We've got additional landscaping and lighting, which connects into footpath 14 locally, or the Macmillan Way, which is one of the East Coast public footpaths that runs through our site. We've got a new upstream mooring pontoons. We've got additional security fencing on the right bank. Obviously, the primary barrier sits next to the public footpath. So as a Category A national infrastructure project, we need to ensure that it's suitably protected. And we've also had to divert 3 11 kV electric cables, which we did really early on in the project before we actually commenced work on site. So the build sequence has been really important for our scheme. Obviously, as you can see here, we've got quite a constrained site. We've got a navigational water body that runs through the middle of it called the Haven. We've got the public footpath that we've diverted, working in partnership with Boston Borough Council on the right bank. And then we're also working on the left bank through an operational port, and we're actually closing down their wet dock entrance later on in the year, as I've just explained. So we had a really confined site, and we've worked really, the sequencing of the work has been highly important. So we've started off on the right bank. We've installed 14 kilometres worth of steel sheet piles into the right bank. We've dredged that material out, which has gone to a local landfill site. So we've worked really closely with a local authority, and that's to get material off the highways through Boston. Again, it's quite a congested town. So what we didn't want to do is end up with an additional 30,000 lorries running through Boston Town Centre to deposit our dredge material in a waste tip site. So what we did was we worked locally with the waste tip contractor, and they're currently capping off their landfill site. So through the testing regime that we've got, we managed to work together so that we could reuse that material locally about a kilometre down the road so that they could cap off their landfill. So not only did that benefit us as a project, whereby we could move the material within a kilometre of our site, but it also meant the landfill site didn't need to import that additional material to cap off their site as they currently are. The tidal barrier was being constructed in Holland through our supply chain, through a Hollandia infrastructure. They've actually constructed a similar barrier down at Ipswich. So we've got a sister barrier down there, which is slightly smaller, which I'll touch on later. But that supply chain, they brought the barrier over back end of last year in November 2019. We installed that barrier in December 2019, and it's now going through its final testing and operational phases to come online later on this year. We're now starting to work on the left bank. So we've piled through the port estate to reconstruct the outer quays. They wouldn't take the loading from our new flood walls. So obviously we need to ensure that our infrastructure is robust for that next 100-year design life. And then we're moving on to the wet dock entrance, and then we're connecting into a grade 2 listed structure on the moored Foster outfall at the bottom end of the port estate. As I say, so to get all this up and running, what we needed to do was to apply to government for a Transport Works Act order. So this gives us all our legal, legislative responsibilities to construct the barrier in a navigational water body, to own it and operate it over the next 100 years. Unfortunately, through that process, we had a number of objections, not only from statutory objectors, but from local stakeholders as well. So the Secretary of State announced a public inquiry for our works in November 2016. And then what we did was through, as you can see in the picture on the left-hand side here, we actually hosted our public inquiry in our community hub, which we've had since 2016, where we've invited members of the public in to come and talk to us, engage with the community, and make sure that people are on board with what we're doing. So we closed the public hub down for a 6-week period in 2017 over Easter. We presented our case to the inspector for him to consider what we were doing and to ensure that we were not adversely impacting on any third parties, stakeholders or individuals. The inspector's report, obviously August 2017, came back as positive, and in November, December 2017, the Secretary of State's decision was announced, and we had our official order came into effect on the 3rd of January 2018. Now that official order gave us all the legal vehicles to allow us to own and operate this barrier moving into the future. But what we did do before that, we undertook that 11 kV power cable diversion, and we did that ahead of us getting our formal approvals under our statutory legislative authority as the Environment Agency. So what we didn't want to do was we wanted to streamline the process, because obviously we've got a very tight deadline to work to protect those additional properties by March 2021. So what we didn't want to do is delay doing those early works that we could do under our other statutory powers. As I've already spoken about, barrier gate arriving back end of last year and installed and operational by the end of the summer this year. So location of the barrier. So not only is the barrier is located at point B here. So just to give you a bit of an idea, this is the Port of Boston from the aerial view. This is the Lower Witham that runs from Grantham all the way around to Lincoln and discharges into the Haven, which is the tidal interface here at Gildersleeves. And there's a man-made water body here in the top left called the South 40 Foot, which again discharges out via Blacksluice Lock upstream of our location. And then we've got a third water body called the Maud Foster, which gravity discharges out by Maud Foster sluices here. So not only is the barrier here to protect those 14,000 properties in Boston, but it's also an integral part of a future strategic ambition to deliver a navigational link between the cathedral cities of Lincoln, Ely and Peterborough. And the idea is to link the water body between the Lower Witham and the South 40 Foot here. At the moment, this section of river is a tidal navigation. The idea for this Fens Waterways link ambition is to deliver a non-tidal link so that individuals can safely navigate between all the cathedral cities. So an integral part of how we are looking to operate the barrier in the future potentially is to retain water upstream. So we had to take those design considerations into place now, so that we once this ambitious project is delivered, then the new barrier didn't prohibit that non-tidal link. So those key design parameters were included. So for that reason, we couldn't construct the barrier upstream of point B because our non-tidal link would not be delivered. Any location between B and the wet dock entrance here, so along these outer quays at point C, which is the Port of Boston's outer quays, the port were adamant that they didn't want us to impact on those outer quays. From an operational point of view, they've got the availability to more vessels and discharge and load cargo on those outer quays. And what they didn't want us to do was to remove that option for them if we constructed the barrier further down. Then as soon as you start getting downstream of the port's wet dock entrance and the moored Foster, obviously we then start looking at design implications of how our new barrier will interface with not only smaller river users from the Boston District Fishing Association and inland navigational boats, but also we then start interfacing with 8,000-ton, 100-metre long seagoing vessels. So the engineering and the design parameters around those become much larger challenges, and obviously the cost of the project increases along with that challenge at the same time. So that's why point C and D in this area were discounted for our barrier location. We then look at point C. So point C isn't just at this location. Point C is from here all the way down to the Wash, so where the haven discharges into the Wash and the North Sea. So there's quite a long stretch between Boston and here. And the Fishing Association and the port, to a greater or lesser degree, were keen to have our barrier further away from the port and the interactions of the narrower river channel and the bends in the river. However, the further we run out towards the Wash, obviously the closer we get to SSSIs, Ramsar sites and all the environmental designations that come with the Wash, the approvals become substantially more difficult. The ground conditions are not as good as what they are at location B, so the substructure construction becomes more expensive and more difficult to deliver. And in addition to that, there's not a lot of power out in the fens, so we'd have to work with Western Power Distribution to deliver additional power provisions to site, as well as upgrading of the local infrastructure on the highways as well. So point B was our preferred location from a cost-efficient point of view, as well as in ensuring that we protected those 14,000 properties on completion and linking into the new navigational project in the future. Part of that navigation project is something that we worked in partnership with HR Wallingford's down in Oxfordshire. Normally they do ship simulations for large vessels and seagoing scenarios, and this was the first time that they'd worked with the Environment Agency or any organisation working with not only seagoing vessels but individual recreational vessels as well. So what we did was, as part of our community engagement, we digitally modelled the haven and the location of the barrier, which you can see at the bottom picture here. So we simulated the haven in all its glory, and we digitised the largest fishing vessel in the area, the port's dredger, an inland waterways boat, a local commercial vessel, and one of the other vessels that uses the river. And what we did was we invited those pilots to come down to Wallingford's with us to pilot their vessel in a virtual world on the river course, to test that their vessel reacted accordingly with all the flows and the wind dynamics that we could apply to it in this virtual world. And then what we did was sent them off for tea and coffee and a bit of cake. And then we magically built the £100 million Boston Barrier, which, as you can see at the bottom, looks to narrow the channel up. One of the main concerns from navigational users was the impact on the navigational channel and how that would impact on them navigating this area of the river. So what we did was we then, after allowing them to pilot the vessel in this virtual world with no barrier, we then allowed them to repilot their vessels through the new barrier, and then we took on board their feedback. That actually drove some changes to the project, where we talked about these additional moorings upstream and downstream for emergency lay-by landings, and additional ladders for access and egress into the watercourse. So by engaging with our community and with our stakeholders, we took on their input, and then we evolved our project to ensure that their concerns were addressed. So we've talked about our hub at the community. It's a key part of our project. We're very proud of it. So we have two really good communications officers, Georgia and Zoe, who are in this top picture here with the local scouts, who man the community hub every Wednesday. But we don't man it from 9 till 5. So we man it from 12 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 o'clock in the evening. So not only do we actively engage with people to come and see us during the day, we also allow people to come and see us after work, in the evenings, come and talk to us. We can update them on what's going on in the project. You will see myself and the design team and the contractors down there. So we really ensure that we're engaged with the local community. We also go down to the local Christmas market every year, again, engaging with the local community, promoting what we're doing. We engage with the local schools, so that's primary schools and secondary schools, and we're promoting engineering, careers in the Environment Agency, and all the different types of careers that we can do, from communications to water management to flood and coastal engineering. And we also do a huge amount of knowledge sharing. So we work with an international community called Ice Storm International. We work with the US Army Corps. We work with the Dutch Rijkswaterstaat, which is the equivalent of the Environment Agency. We work with the Italians, who manage the Moses coastal defense system. And we also work with the Russians as well when they turn up. And then through that community, we share all good and bad practices. And the idea behind that is we can learn from each other, but also we can share the things that haven't worked quite so well. So what we do is we ensure that other people learn from potentially our mistakes, and we can then evolve that learning into something that benefits not only us locally, but the international community from coastal surges. So part of that key learning, a few pictures here to run through in the top left here. So we learned from our Ipswich colleagues. We sat down with that supplier. As I say, there's a smaller barrier, the sister barrier to Boston down in Ipswich, which is 20 meters wide, whereas Boston is 25 meters wide. One of the key feedbacks from that design and construction team was the installation of the reinforced concrete and generating that inverted recess for the barrier to sit in so that it's safe and protected within the bed of the river. The Ipswich team had to install a 200-ton temporary shutter to construct their concrete invert, which came at an amazing piece of engineering and an amazing delivery. However, it was very complex and very time consuming. So working with our team and their team, we came up with precast units. So we have 22 precast units, which were manufactured off-site in a nice dry environment in a factory. So we get really good finishes to millimeter accuracy. They were brought over via lorry, over from Ireland, onto the site, and they were lifted and installed in 3 days. So we go from a 3-month construction period at Ipswich to a 3-day construction period at Boston. So all the efficiencies that drove just through our teams working more closely together. We do a build it twice theory on our project. So we have a virtual digital model of our entire construction. So this image here in the top in the center shows all the individual rebar sections that we've got, all the pipe ducting, and the clash detection that the model then undertakes to ensure that we understand that as we bring all those component parts together, if there's any clashes with the rebar, the hydraulics, the steel work, and what we can do is we can do that early intervention so that we can prevent that clash occurring when we're actually physically constructing that on site. Again, reinforcement, key component of the superstructure. Again, middle of winter is always when you end up doing reinforcement. It's cold, it's wet, it's rainy. So we did as much reinforcement fabrication off-site. They were brought to site on lorries, and they were lifted in place with the cranes that we had on site. Again, simple way of evolving and ensuring a quick and efficient delivery of that superstructure. We've got our control building here on the left and our virtual control building here in the middle. Through our engagement with our end users, it turned out that in our original location where the control building was, we didn't have very good views upstream and downstream of the control building. So what we did was, with these windows here that you can see on the left, we pulled the building forward. So originally the building was back here in the site. We pulled the building as far forward as we physically could to ensure that we opened up those sight lines so people can see any navigational traffic on the system. And in addition to that, in Leeds in 2015, where some of our assets were inundated through a flood and it inundated the power supply, We originally had our secondary or primary standby generator here and all our hydraulic units on the ground floor, standard practice. We make a concrete bucket, we protect it. Through that stakeholder conversation, somebody's just sat in a meeting and said, why don't you just put it on the first floor? We all looked at each other, a bit bemused and gone, really good idea, why haven't we thought of that? So we flipped the building on its head, which means we could save money on the piling that would have been required to anchor that building into the ground as a bathtub originally. We put everything on the first floor. The generator goes outside, so we don't have to worry about ventilation, and all our hydraulics sit on the first floor. And in addition to that, we've also got solar panels on the roof. So we're looking at a net zero operational building. So most of the year when we're just feeding electric into the grid, we then hopefully become cost neutral. Our hydraulic rams were manufactured in Germany through a specialist manufacturer, as I said earlier, 56 tons each, some of the biggest rams in the country. And we've also then modelled some, this here is a U-frame, which takes our hydraulic pipes from one side of the barrier to the other, a single piece that can be lifted in and out should it need to be replaced in the future. And then this picture here is one of the more complex pictures that we've got of our 3D model, where we show all our existing tie rods and all our new proposed infrastructure and how we're going to thread the new works in between the existing structures. We were a project where we touched on sustainable development goals, so United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We did a retrospective back look at our project. When I initially started looking at this, I bring up the SDGs, looked at 17, and I was thinking, how on earth does a project like we do look at delivering better quality education, work to reduce poverty? But once you start looking at it, those top 17 highlights, when you start breaking them down into the 146 component parts that sit underneath them, we were really pleased that when we started addressing our project, that we felt we could evidence that we met all 17 objectives. And this was doing a retrospective look. So corporately, we're now working to deliver our sustainable development goals and using this as part of the driver to how we evolve our projects and work with partners. So we've got things like all 17 we've obviously addressed, and we've got an evidence portfolio. And then we've picked up on a few of those just to enhance on how we've delivered them. So quality education is the one that I like picking out. We love engaging with the local community. So we've got local school engagement with the primary schools and secondary schools. We've got registered STEM ambassadors on the project where we engage with those students and teachers to promote all things that we do. And we work a number of mentoring schemes as well locally. Industry, innovation and infrastructure. Obviously, the work that we're doing is there to prevent flooding in the local area. So the local assets and businesses and the key component parts for schools, hospitals, fire service, police stations, and local businesses obviously have that enhanced level of protection. And so far to date, we've invested in excess of £4 million in the local economy within a 50-kilometre radius of our site. So we've been using the local economy as much as we physically can to deliver this major infrastructure. Responsible construction, we've talked about the dredge waste and the reduction of lorry movements on site, and the temporary works that we've reused as many times as possible rather than using something once and then disposing of it. International partnerships, so not only are we working locally, internally with our other environment agency colleagues, and we've obviously got that international network with Ice Storm. So a huge amount of work that goes into that, where we're sharing and receiving information. And we've also been, oh, sorry about that. And we've also submitted a number of awards for the BCI Awards on Community Engagement and Initiatives. So where are we today? So we've got a barrier navigation that's now open to navigational traffic. So we had our inaugural opening at the beginning of June. We've now closed our bypass channel and we're continuing to close that down and connecting to our left bank works that you can see here in the central picture. Our right bank works is nearing completion, so we can look to open the public footpath in the near future with all the murals and telling the story and linking into the local Boston community story that they've done in their redevelopment. And then that's where we are today. So thank you very much. We have a huge social media footprint. where we've got Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, where we actively promote our works. We're releasing some additional time-lapse footage next week. So please do sign up to follow us and find out what we're doing. If you need any further information, please link back into our Environment Agency email address or drop us a line through the RTPI, and we're quite happy to take any other questions. Thank you very much. I'll hand you back to Chris.
Thank you very much, Adam. That was very engaging. And I think sort of several things that I took before I move on to Mike is the use of materials came out of that, the net zero carbon intent in terms of the linkage to the use of materials. And I never quite realised the sort of wider ramifications of the watercourse network going on in this part of Lincolnshire. That's something I've learned today from the off, and I have to say I have been to this site through many a childhood family trip in the car this way on. So you know, I still didn't understand the sort of network like that. I suppose you don't appreciate them as a child. Would it be, how many of these tidal projects are there nationwide like this, just out of interest?
So we're the only one that's being constructed at the moment. We do have another project over at Bridgewater, over near the Severn, that's coming online. They're just going through their Transport Works Act order application. And we've also got additional tidal defences in places like Hull, Thames Barrier, obviously, and a whole raft of smaller but quite significant projects in and around London as well.
Great, great. I think, you know, it's only onwards and upwards in terms of national importance, in terms of, you know, we know as an island nation we need to be investing in this form of infrastructure. So hopefully, you know, we've got more of this to come. I will come back to sort of general questions later on, but I think it's time now to move on to our next presenter, who is Mike Gildersleeves, the Growth Manager at Boston Borough Council. And what we wanted to also cover today is also the role of local change. We've covered community engagement through the Community Hub at the Barrier Project, but this is part of a wider scope into the Borough of Boston, and where actually community engagement has benefited the local authority, its partnerships, and you know, investment in growth. So over to Mike for the second part of our presentation. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you very much, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can all see the slides. So when I was asked to look at the local change element of today's seminar, it got me thinking about the role of partnerships within that, and actually how we can only really effectively deliver local change through that partnership. So I'm going to take you on a quick whistle-stop tour about some successful partnerships that we've got in Boston, and the idea of #TeamBoston. So for those that don't know, Boston is located on the East Coast. We are the second largest urban centre within Lincolnshire, population of about 70,000 people within the borough. We experienced rapid population growth in the early 2000s as a result of significant inward migration from many European nations, all to supplement the agricultural economy and the food economy within the local area. Set alongside that, we've got a rich cultural and historic interest within the town, and at one time the Port of Boston was second only to London in terms of its importance. The port is a key part of our economy today, and our economy is still heavily driven by that input into the agricultural and food sector, as well as wider engineering and manufacturing. So in that context, the first partnership I'm going to talk about is the local plan, every good planner's starting point. The local plan for Boston is the South East Lincolnshire local plan. That is a joint strategic plan that was initially conceived in about 2010. And it was the idea of working in partnership with our neighbours at South Holland District Council to look at strategic issues in a more cohesive way. And then working closely with the County Council. The idea really came to fruition in 2011 through a statutory instrument to form the Joint Strategic Planning Committee. Now, over time, the plan has developed and was ultimately adopted in March 2019, which is a real success story, with the Joint Policy Unit that supports the Joint Strategic Planning Committee being made up of officers from both the councils and also the County Council. And what that does for us is it It sets out a cohesive vision across the South East Lincolnshire region. It is ambitious in terms of its growth, and it gives us a really good starting point to help address some of the challenges that we have, to encourage growth and further investment, whilst also tackling some of those longer lasting issues, biodiversity net gain, climate change, etc. So that is our starting point, and probably one of our key successes. I'm then quickly going to move on to affordable housing delivery and housing delivery in general, really. Boston is a relatively modest authority in terms of its overall size, but we have a very, very good track record on housing delivery, which we can only secure really by working closely with our partners. We have a significant need for affordable housing, as I say, as a result of that inward migration, that rapid influx, which has driven up market rental incomes within the locality, set against the relative wages within the economies that the populace serve. But what we've seen is over the last 3 years, we've consistently hit our housing targets, and we've almost had 30 to 35% over the last 4 years of that overall delivery is coming from the affordable housing sector. Now, the way we do that is by planning services officers, housing services officers within the council working collectively together. And then we internally work very well with our key 3 registered providers that we have. We have regular meetings with them. We regularly talk about their pipeline. We look at the need and the demand as it changes. And we actively look at working together to promote sites and bring forward sites. So really, this underpins that track record of delivery. We couldn't do this on our own as a council. We're not a stock holding authority. So therefore, we are really very much governed by working in partnership with our RP partners and others such as Homes England to secure that delivery and ultimately meet the needs of our community. This has resulted in some notable successes for us, particularly in terms of some of the sites that have been a bit more troublesome or problematic for the traditional house building market. But it's not all about delivery. It is about looking at quality and actually the local impacts as a result of that development. And again, how we working in partnership can secure those aims. Now, this particular site that there are a number of images on screen now is 100% affordable scheme being delivered by Platform Housing Group. It's nearing completion and will deliver in the first phase 86 affordable units of mixed tenure. It is part of a wider allocation of up to 224 units. Now, this site in itself might not appear particularly spectacular, but it sits in a context of, it sits next to one of our estates where we have a number of social deprivation issues, a number of indicators in that regard. And this is about raising the quality, raising the aspiration within that immediate locality. The aim of that is through the design of the units. There is going to be a circular piece of open space, which is a central feature within the development that would be accessible for all the residents of this new estate, but also for the existing estate that sits behind. And there are also a number of connections to the river, which you can just see in the top right image. All again, which seek to identify providing a quality scheme with quality links and quality facilities and amenities to generally raise the aspiration for the adjacent estate and the immediate locality as it is. One of our other partnerships that we're particularly proud of is the Quadrant. This was a large mixed-use application submitted to the council in approximately 2014, centred around the relocation of the existing football club, which you can see on the right-hand image, from a site within the centre of the town to an area on the southeastern side of the town. To supplement that, as part of an enabling argument, there would be approximately 500 new dwellings, a section of a link to provide a section of the Boston Distributor Road, which is identified within our local plan, as well as other commercial uses. Now, as you can imagine, at the time, this did generate a number of differing views, particularly the classic arguments around the use of greenfield land on the edge of the settlement, etc., as well as the key issue really of moving the stadium out of the centre of town, a number of the facilities, etc., that benefit on a match day, raising significant concerns about that and what the impact would be in terms of general sustainability. But as that application progressed, it was progressed in partnership between the council's officers and the developers, and subsequently permission was granted in March 2015. But that isn't the end of the story. The scheme itself did run into viability challenges, and the council could have just left it there in terms of its role of local planning authority, but it didn't. And working in partnership with the developers, the council and Homes England, we all managed to secure an additional £3.5 million of additional funding through the Housing Infrastructure Fund, principally to provide the additional highway infrastructure and also towards the new stadium, which would be a community interest company, and would also have a number of community facilities. Development started on site in 2017, 2018, and following numerous amendments is now well underway. And again, it is that partnership approach seeking to address any problems as they've arisen. And that has very much driven the fact that we've got commercial sites that are on the ground and open. We've got a stadium and community facilities which are underway. We've got a number of housing units, over 100 housing units, including 50 affordable units, with more to come. We've got a care home being under construction and a hotel which should be open and operational by the end of the year. So why are we proud of this? I think really there's a number of things really. The first is that there's always that cynicism and skepticism that this is just another housing site, the facilities won't come, the stadium won't come. And actually, we've proven all the way along there, working in partnership with the developer, we've addressed every hurdle. We've had the start on site, we've now got the community stadium, and there is a real buzz about the place. But it's more than that. It is about, for the council, it's a good example of showing that credibility of what you can do working in partnership. But it also reinforces that this is a can-do place to come and invest. We've created jobs, we've created homes, and ultimately we've created a quality place. So those are some of the reasons why we are particularly proud of the Quadrant. But the Quadrant and the local plan and everything that's gone before it is just another step in terms of those partnerships. And I'd like to bring forward where we are now in terms of a recent partnership and our town deal. So Boston is lucky enough to have been selected as one of over 100 towns as part of the Towns Fund initiative, the potential to secure up to £25 million worth of investment into the town to facilitate projects that would help the future prosperity and legacy of the town. There is a focus on urban regeneration to ensure that the town is a thriving place for people to live, work and invest, skills and enterprise investment, as well as digital and physical connectivity. And what we're particularly proud of is the fact that where we are as a council now is our town deal board is a very diverse board, some of which we have to have, but the majority of which are voluntary partners. And you can see there we've got private, public sector and third sector partners that have come forward to that arrangement. As part of that, our board, as part of our investment plan development, are very keen on how we engage. We've looked to use social media to reach various different groups. We've looked to engage with all members of the community, particularly those where English is not the first language. And through our promotion on Facebook and on My Town, etc., we've very much driven a lot of feedback and a lot of projects and a lot of ideas. So again, it goes to show that whilst the council administers the town deal, it is very much driven by that collective ambition of the board members and the wider community. So that takes us where we are today. We've got a track record of delivery. We can show we're good at working in partnership, but so what? There are the accolades for the council in terms of the feedback, as you can see from screen, that came out through a recent peer challenge. But more than that, it's taught us about where we are now and where we go next, and the idea of #TeamBoston, which is about we as a council working with the range of partners, as I've identified, to look at the art of the possible, to say, actually, what can we do? How can we achieve this? How can we address those barriers? How can we make these projects happen? And all of us really collectively working together to raise the aspirations of people locally through delivery of jobs, delivery of new homes, delivery of quality spaces, delivery of infrastructure. it is all about that, all working together and all having that cohesive and collective aim of actually we just want to raise aspirations for future generations. So for us, hashtag Team Boston is about how we all work together to collectively raise those ambitions, and the delivery aspects of that through our partnerships just give credibility to our intentions and ultimately can demonstrate that how you can really deliver local change. So that's all I really wanted to say today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. That was great. And I think, you know, what really sold it for me in terms of when I came to visit and you showed me around Boston back in February was that aspirational message. It was, we at the RTPI East Midlands really wanted to raise the profile of different parts of our region and making sure that we're covering the geographic spread of our region effectively. So we thought we'd go out to our market towns, and the aspirational message of Team Boston really came across in the media that I read, which led me to contacting you about the visit. And I you know, I wish the borough every success with its future ventures on that. And I think perhaps sort of that leads in really well to the next part of our webinar, which was to invite RTPI President Sue Manns perhaps for a few comments, but also to sort of kickstart any questions as well to our panelists today. Sue.
Thank you very much. And firstly, thank you very, very much to you, Mike, and to you, Adam, for absolutely brilliant presentations. I really enjoyed them. I know, Mike, you talked about the difference that the scheme, the Boston football relocation scheme, the Quadrant, had actually made to the town. And you said there's a real buzz. Well, I feel that buzz as you were talking about it. They are both really interesting and really exciting schemes. And it's left me with so much to think about. There's the climate action side of things, there's the community engagement side, there's the positive change, there's the making a difference, which is, I think, what we are all about, that just comes through from all of them. So just sort of taking a step back, to me, planning is actually about people and places and shaping those for the better. And the decisions that we take now will actually long outlive us, and they will have benefits that well outlive us. So we've got to get them right. And I think listening to the process that you went through in both of the presentations is absolutely right. It's about listening to communities. It's about showing how good engagement actually changes things. And really importantly, it's about joined up thinking, whether that joined up thinking is with an individual state or set of stakeholders, or whether it's the community or putting it all together. It really comes through that partnership approach. So I've got a couple of questions. In fact, I've got a whole shed load of questions, but I've been struggling to reduce them to a couple. So if I sort of start by, if I run through what the questions will be with a bit of a preamble, and then if I do that to Adam, it gives you a minute to think. Well, I actually explain what I'm going to ask Mike and give you a minute to think. So I think, Adam, I mentioned in our sort of chat earlier that I've got a background in physical geography and hydrology, and so all of that, and coastal change and climate change has been absolutely stimulating. But what particularly jumped out, two things particularly jumped out to me. One was the use of the virtual technology and how you brought the pilots in of the 3 different boats and actually worked through a scheme to see how it happens in physical terms, on the ground or on the river in that particular case. And I think that is so innovative and so different. And it really, isn't it wonderful if we could all do that with all of the schemes that we do? But it shows the powers of that engagement. I thought the engagement that you did with the community hub was absolutely brilliant. As someone who's been involved in scouting for 20 years, I am so glad you got the scouts there, because I've got them involved in engagement and they are spot on. But the thing I actually wanted to ask you in the question, it relates interestingly to the 17 SDGs. And I think the way you've actually tested your scheme against those 17 SDGs, it's the first time I've actually seen somebody do that. And I think it's an exemplar of how we can think. But what intrigued me is that you did that in retrospect, assessing how, in terms of the knowledge that you've clearly gained from that and how you can start to see how it all fits together. Are you now looking, or will you be looking at building that in as part of future schemes? So it's part of the process. So that's my question. I'll let Adam think about that. But Mike, I thought everything that you said, absolutely brilliant. The joint working and the delivery that you achieve through joint working. Just taking the affordable housing target, 30 to 35% is really, really seriously impressive. And I wrote down one of the things that you'd got on your slide, but also you said, and it was really important, and I think it goes back to my intro, meeting the needs of the community. And that's at the heart of what we're doing. And I thought that the way you tackle the challenges with the Quadrant and the viability issues by working in partnership and actually really making a difference and bringing something back that could easily have just disappeared if you hadn't taken that action. The other thing I picked up that I think it came through from both presentations, that Mike, you were the one to actually say it, and it's about the diversity on the town board. Because if we don't have a diverse range of voices around the table, some of the best ideas and some of the different ways of thinking just are not heard. Adam, you picked that up in the way the building was flipped over, because somebody thought about something differently. And if we're all the same, it just doesn't work. We're just an echo chamber between ourselves. So my question actually for you, Mike, is, you mentioned with the Quadrant that there were different views in the community about the relocation, those for and those against. If you went back now to speak to those same people, do you think there would have been a shift in those views? Or do you feel that people think, no, it's proved I was right, whichever way around? Or has there been a sort of coming together? So those are my two questions. So if I can throw to Adam first on that one, on the one I posed you, the SDGs.
Lovely, so thank you very much. No pressure there. Yeah, so as I said in the presentation, we were the first project to retrospectively look at those UN SDGs, and they're a key part of the Environment Agency's strategic ambitions moving forward. So we are looking to prioritise 3 of those SDGs as our primary goals. And then we're looking at 3 or 4 as our secondary objectives across our whole organisation. Obviously, we released our 5-year strategic ambition yesterday, which links into our EA 2025 ambition. So that sets out 3 long-term goals, which are a nation resilient to climate change, obviously, which has got clear linkages into what we're delivering in Boston, healthy air, land and water, and a green growth and sustainable future agenda. So as you can see, with those 3 long-term goals for the next 5 years link into the SDGs really clearly. And what we're looking to do on our major projects is to highlight our 3 corporate priorities. So when we engage with our other stakeholders, so the likes of people like Boston Borough Council or Lincolnshire County Council in my case, those organisations are also developing their key SDG linkages. So where we can see that actually our primary goals link with your primary goals, actually this is a really good project that both of us can work together on in partnership. So that can help us with funding between both parties, and it can help all our organisations then deliver kind of infrastructure projects that are better geared towards everyone's benefits across the country. So that's the plan.
That's fantastic, thank you. Over to you, Mike. Do you think views would have changed?
I think some views have changed. I think I'd come back to one of my starting points is the football club are backed by Chestnut Homes. Chestnut Homes were the lead applicant on the application. Their ethos is to build homes. They're a regional house builder. And so everybody kind of thought, oh, they're just in it for the houses. They're just in it for a quick buck. The houses won't be good quality, and the stadium and all the other things won't happen. And actually what we've created is a place, and that is a credit as much to the developer as us, in terms of the initial roles that we've played, to actually create a place that is functioning. It's got people living there, it's got facilities, it will have a stadium. So it's proving those doubters wrong. And yeah, I think there will be those people that were part of residents groups and such like, that didn't want to see this happen, that probably kind of now going, oh, I might nip and have a Costa just around the corner, or go and use the play park that's been put in. But as I say, I think the best outcome we can all say is actually we've got something that's been delivered on the ground, and it is a nice place to be, and it's where people want to live, and the businesses that have developed around it.
That's super. Thank you ever so much. Now I must hand back to Chris because I've hogged the questions.
Not a problem, sir. There were a great set of questions, and I'm just going to sort of probably finish on one for both of you, if I may, which is, Do you think that in all of this, in your respective work, that the digitisation of community engagement, not just looking at social media here, but through use of different technology, has diversified and lifted the role of public engagement, and perhaps looking at applicants as well and how much value they might treat community engagement, that has been treated more seriously than perhaps it was? Do you think that, in a short answer, does that resonate with you?
I'm quite happy to go first. I think our engagement, the fact that we've got such a breadth now of digital and physical engagement, we've gone such a long way from historical stuff where you present a flat drawing, that actually you get better engagement with the community, because you can see their minds engaging with it more when you present a 3D printed plastic model of what you're going to construct, where you can physically show them a video of what it's going to look as you fly through a new structure. I think you get a lot better engagement and feedback from the local community and stakeholders in all matters. I think their understanding is just so much better.
And I would tend to agree. And I think what we've seen with the barrier and other significant infrastructure projects that we've got in the area is this ability to do engagement outside the normal times. So you get that wider spread, talking about not just doing 9 to 5 and actually doing things slightly differently to capture that breadth of feeling. Certainly with the town deal, what we found is by engaging on social media platforms and in other ways like that, we've actually captured a younger voice, as opposed to the typical people that would respond to a community consultation or to come forward with ideas. So it is about actually, using what tools and things are available to us now in a different way to deliver some outcomes, really.
Thank you both. That's really encouraging news, and may it continue. So that actually brings the webinar this afternoon to a close. And thank you to both of our speakers, to Adam and to Mike, and also to Sue as well today, for all of your collective inputs today. I hope from a perspective as an attendee, you found today's webinar useful. We do have a number of other events coming our way that are available to the national audience. Not least, we've got the Biodiversity Net Gain webinar that's hosted by RTPI East Midlands. I'm aware that places are filling out pretty fast on that, and that'll be on the 28th of July at 11 o'clock in the morning. So you get a chance to hear about the Environment Bill and the implications of the biodiversity net gain measures that are contained within that. Very useful for all planning professionals and other built environment professionals. In terms of today's webinar, we'd be grateful for some feedback on the session today. So there will be a request for a form to be filled in following this session. And in terms of the wider handouts, we'd be grateful if you could promote this, perhaps revisit it at a later stage. The handouts will be with you following this session. And please have a look on the RTPI's YouTube channel as well, where this will be posted online. But once again, thank you very much, and goodbye to you all. All right, have a good weekend.